Hey everyone, how you doing? Welcome back to another episode of Unios Insights Live. Today we are still at Perth HQ, but we're out in the production area. So I'll go through kind of what we do out here as well. But yeah, please, as always, you can grab this. Obviously you're watching it live now, but if you can't catch the whole thing, do jump on our YouTube channel at Unios Light to grab the rest of the episode, or watch any of the previous episodes from before. Cool. So what we're doing out here in production is we're going to talk about optics, right? But this is where we actually change all of our optics in our kind of light fittings and luminaires. And I just wanted to do this little example out here and kind of show you the different types of optics control that Unios has, and then just talk to other types as well, right? So I suppose there's so many different types of kind of ways to control the light coming out of our fittings. Okay, so there's really basic ways where we can just maybe an incandescent lamp, for instance. That's a type of kind of control that it's going to have out there. Then we can go to stuff like this, right? Like a frosted face or an opal diffused, and that's going to throw really wide beam angles, but we're going to sacrifice things like comfort and all those kinds of bits and pieces. There's other things like prismatic, so very similar to the opal stuff, but we've got all these little bumps and everything on this. This is actually diffusing the light, so you might see this in your office or on an old batten light fitting or something like that. And that's like a prismatic one. So that's, again, really wide throw, but we're not actually controlling the light, right? We're getting it out there, we're doing something, we're getting it wide, we're taking it away from the initial kind of light source, which is the LED chip. And we're putting in something in front of it to make it do something, okay? Now, I suppose that still is a type of control, right? We're controlling it by making it really wide. But yes, like I said, sacrifices can come when it's, comfort, glare, all the things we've talked about in previous episodes as well. So what's the first kind of basic kind of thing when we actually want to guide some stuff around? And this is where I'm going to kind of start talking about the two main types, right? Which is reflectors and lenses. Okay, so this is a reflector. Okay, what this does is it pretty much does what it says its name is. It reflects light. Okay, so light will come out of that LED light source that sits in the back here, right? We'll sit here right where my finger is. That's got kind of almost like 180 degrees of throw, right? It sits flat on a surface and it just throws light everywhere. Okay, so when that light kind of comes out of the LED chip, it hits these and it guides it back inside. So it'll come out on its angle and then it'll guide it back in. But I suppose the main issue with this is once we have like the LED chip in the center, there's nothing usually if it goes straight, right? So a lot of that light's going to go straight on. And then what actually happens is that's not touching any part of the reflector. And then you end up with a greater intensity on the surface. Now, remember, when it comes to light fittings, everything is about what that light looks like once it hits the surface, because that's when it turns visible. Light is invisible until it hits the surface, right? We have to, that's the only way we can see it. That's the only way we can enjoy the light. So once we actually come out and hit that surface from a reflector, it's going to have an intensity spot, right? And then once all this other light that's been reflected and bounced around actually catches up with it, it's at a lower intensity. So that's when you start getting kind of maybe a hot spot in the center, or maybe a secondary kind of ring around of dimmer light coming out of that reflector. Now, what does a reflector do well? It does wide beam angles quite well, right? So when I'm talking about ambient light, so you had a wide beam angle like this, you can see the two different types here. So we've got a wide beam angle over here, and then there's less bumps on this one. So that's a narrow beam, right? So we're not bouncing it around everywhere. We're being more controlled. But even still with this, with a reflector and a narrow beam, we can still only guide a portion of the light. We can probably still only guide about 50% of the light going towards our surface, which is what matters, okay? So a bit of a jump on from that would be stuff like this. So this is another form of primary optic, right? So this is a lens. So you can see where the LED chip sits at the back. Every single particle of light that's coming out of that LED chip has to pass through this. So this is when we start getting, really heightened levels of control. Now we're going to go upstairs into the technical showroom after this, and you're actually going to see the differences up against the wall, which is going to be really, really cool. But I just wanted to kind of go through and show you these basic kind of items that we install in our light fittings, so you can see that. So yeah, every single part comes off. You can get a lot more uniform beam spread, a lot better for accenting. You can have a softer edge. All those kinds of bits and pieces really play into the part of that. So that's more on the lens side, which you'll see the differences when we go upstairs. But that's, yeah, a lot more control, you know, upwards of 80% control versus the 50% we have over here. The next part, when we come to really guiding that light across, is we use, you know, some secondary stuff, right? Some secondary optics. So this is a really cool one. It's a linear spreader lens, or you might have seen it called like a wide oval or a wide kind of elongated beams and things like that. That's when you can start shaping it beyond just that kind of 360-degree kind of circle, right? This is really cool because, you know, not everything is desired to have that circle, whether we're angling it up against the wall or a feature or an image or down a corridor or anything like that. This one is really, really good for guiding that light a little bit further than we want. The next one, which I'm going to show you, is something like a wall washer, right? So we're not only using a lens or an optic, we're actually using the fitting itself to guide the light, okay? So light's going to come in here, it's going to reflect. It's also going to be going through this lens as well, this secondary optic, and then we're going to throw it out onto the wall in a really uniform way. Now, beyond all this, we can actually kind of create optics that we don't here at Unios, but you can create optics, especially with the outdoor ranges and things like that. You can actually pick cutoffs, right? I want this to light from here to here. I want this to do this from here to here when you're doing something that's really, really specific. So it's all about getting the light to do what we want it to do. Right? Last thing I mentioned before we walk upstairs quickly is going to be just these couple of things, right? I mean, these are technically classed as secondary optics, right? But they're more about glare control and stuff like that. So, you know, taking these honeycombs, placing them over things like opal diffusers, you get a little bit more of an image. You still get your wide beam, but you can reduce the glare down as well. Cool, cool. There's so much more to talk about this, but I know we only have kind of 15 to 20 minutes for this webinar. But yeah, it's a really interesting subject to get in, and it's all about the light, right? So let's go upstairs, and we are going to have a look at what this actually looks like when it hits the surface, right? We can see the difference between all of them. So if you're just going to follow me, it's a little bit of a walk from production all the way up to the showroom. So bear with me. Maybe Brent will kind of show you around the place as we're walking. And we're going to cut through a few of our areas here. So this is actually the marketing and engineering area. And we're going to have to go upstairs all the way to the showroom. So pretty much majority of the time when we are talking about reflectors and lenses is there's usually a bit of a price difference, right? And that's kind of the big kind of hurdle to overcome when we are using reflectors. And then we do want to make that jump to that far superior control of the lens. Now, I'm not saying reflectors are dead. They definitely have a great purpose for that ambient light, for really kind of wide beam stuff. And say if you're in like a H&M or something like that, right? Or a Uniqlo, some big department store where they don't want that hierarchy. It's just a nice even distribution. That's when they're going to put, you know, 700 track lights on the ceiling, and that's that outcome that you're going to get from a reflector. All right, made it upstairs, and we're going to go through to the technical showroom for the rest of this webinar. All righty, so we're going to come through, and I've got a couple of lights on at the moment, which are these, right? So this is a lens based, and this is going a little bit more onto the beam angle side of things, which I know we have covered a little bit in a previous one. But yeah, just how well can the different type of optics actually, you know, perform the task, right? So this is a lens based, but a reflector would probably do the exact same thing. What you might get with a reflector is a little bit more of a sharper edge, especially when we look at this kind of wall over here. It is quite soft. I don't know what it's looking like on the camera, but with a lens, you will get a nice soft finish on there. with a reflector, you might have got a little bit harsher finish. If I then switch over, we're changing. Now, this is what a lens is capable of, or this is the kind of stuff that a reflector can't actually achieve, right? So that real kind of tight beam angle, this is a 12-degree beam angle. We don't have a lot of spill light that's happening all the way around there as well. And I'll show you that when we focus on the wall, you're actually going to see how much spill light a narrow reflector actually will produce. Okay, so this is really important to see that definition between those spots are quite close to each other. They're probably about 1 meter apart at a 2.7 meter ceiling. And we've still got some definition, some clear definition between the beams there as well. So what I'm talking about, so this is a lens, right? And this is how you can potentially, use them inappropriately, right? So we're trying to light this space. Imagine this is just, it's not a showroom, it's not anything, it's just this one big room. Now I've used a lens, because I was like, oh yeah, I've got to use lens. And I've selected the beam angle wrong, right? And then we get all these 6 spots that's happening, and that's not really a good time, right? It's not visually good. We're noticing it, which you don't want to notice it at all. And yeah, you can clearly see that. I'm hoping you can clear the definition between the beams on the camera. Brant's giving me a good thumbs up, so that's ideal. So now we're going to go to a reflector with a wide beam angle, and we're going to see what kind of difference that makes, right? So yeah, really kind of impactful. This is when reflectors, this is what they're really good at. It's just that general ambient light, right? So we're not trying to do anything kind of funky. We're just trying to get light into a space, which, in my personal opinion, it shouldn't always be the goal to just light the space. We want to do a little bit more than that. But this is what can happen when so a reflector still has a lot of power, and it's still definitely useful in the space as well. So let's go over this way, and I'm going to show you a couple more kind of narrow stuff and bits and pieces. And actually, I'm going to show you one more thing in here I've just thought of. So let's look at a linear lens in work with a wide beam angle, right? So I might just get you to step right back to the curtain there, Brent. And I'm going to go, okay, here. All right, so this is just that standard kind of beam, right, coming out. So we're going to use the same light fitting. All we're going to do is change the optics, okay? So this is a 24-degree beam angle that's happening right here. I'm going to change it up. I'm going to widen it a little bit, right? I'm going to take it up to about a 40. I think it's a 36 or 40 in this one. But I'm going to put that linear spreader lens on it that we were talking about before. So exactly the same light, just changing the optics. And this is the kind of outcome that we get, right? So I've elongated the beam all the way down. We've got the 2 kind of square edges on the edge. And we've just really, really spread it out. Obviously, we've lost a little bit of intensity, but if we're in a canopy outdoors, we don't need that intensity, right? It's better off using less light fittings than potentially having this bright space that looks like it's a pharmacy or a hospital, right? So yeah, getting that just that little bit extra effort of selecting a secondary optic, and then you'll be able to get something that looks like this, rather than that little spot, same fitting, and just slightly change the optic control, right? We want to guide the light to where we want it to be. And that's what it's all about. It's not about the fitting. It's not about the aesthetics of the fitting. It's about how well it lights up the surfaces inside the spaces that we're enjoying. So let's go over here. And I'm going to turn on this one. Cool. Get you to probably stay there for a sec. So this is a reflector based. I've just got 4 downlights on in the ceiling. Now, I'm assuming it's just looking like it's lit. There's not really much mood or anything like that. I just want to show you the difference between what these lights can't do, okay? So what they can't do is have that accenting like we talked about. But if I go down and click something like this, for instance, right, we can see the spots that are happening on here, okay? We can see it's a nice, really soft kind of linear spreader lens that's happening over the couch that's illuminating that. If I go a little bit further down and I kind of take more light out of it, we can see that we're just highlighting bits and pieces of furniture rather than just having that general light. So when we want to take our designs further, and we want to create actual mood and comfort and all those things that are super, super important in every single space, a reflector is not going to be able to do that job. I just want to show you this kind of pot plant over here, because I just want to show you, we saw the linear lens with a wider beam angle, but I want to show you the linear lens with a really narrow. So we're going to take this light that you can see above us right now that's doing this little 5-degree spot happening over here, and we're going to put a linear spreader on that, okay? And now we're going to highlight and accent bits and pieces that are happening over here. So we've got a really narrow kind of line of light that's coming from the floor pretty much all the way up. This is, you know, probably over 2 meters, I would say. And, you know, it's really making a feature out of that. If we just stuck a 5-degree, like what's on the coffee table, you'd have to choose, right? Am I going to light the plant? Am I going to light the pot? Am I going to just light the center and have darkness? Or am I going to go wider and have a big spill light onto the projector and onto the cabinetry? That's what we need to think about when we're guiding this light, okay? All right, now let's have a look at this artwork over here. Brent's going to stand right there because we practiced this yesterday. So what I'm going to do is show you a reflector with a 15-degree, okay? So what you're seeing now is a big hot spot that's happening in the center of this image. That's that reflector trying really, really hard to get 50% of its output inside that desired beam angle, okay? So that's what's happening right here. Then we have all that spill light. Also that's due to, you know, it's not actually touching the reflector, right? It's coming straight out of the chip like we talked about and then hitting the surface. It's not actually doing any reflecting. Then we've got this spill light. So we bounced around all the light, right? And then it came out. It's not as bright as the center because that was going straight. Bounced around a few times. It's lost some lumen output. And then we get this secondary kind of ring. Plus, we can't actually control any of it. Right? It's just going where it needs to go. So that's why we get this big arc that's happening all the way around the image. And we get quite a sharp edge that's actually happening on it as well because it's hitting the edge of the actual light fitting itself. It's not being controlled before it got to the edge. So that's how we get that. If I go to the scope, which is a lens based, so now we've got a lot more uniform spread across the image that we're looking at, okay? The edges are really, really soft. That's happening, so it's not catching our eye. It's not that big difference between kind of light and dark, that contrast that we always try and avoid. It's just kind of, you're not noticing that, right? If I go back, right, we almost notice this line before we even look at the artwork we're trying to light up. Our eye kind of automatically jumps across to that difference, that contrast line. I'll come back. So yeah, we're not getting this big light pull that's happening down on the floor. We're not getting big light on either side, and we can see the picture more clearly. Well, hopefully you can on the camera. I can definitely see it more clearly. So I suppose the final kind of way of guiding light is putting, okay, we put lenses, but how many lenses can we put in? We can put multiple lenses. We can try and control it. But then we can actually put in like mechanical tools to actually shape the beams of light. And that's really, really important. And that's kind of that ultimate step, right, of trying to guide the light exactly where you want it. So what does that look like? That looks like something like this, right? So you can see we've got no spill happening outside the image. Nothing above, nothing below. And what we're doing is we're using mechanical tools to actually slide in and shape that beam of light to exactly what we want it. Now we can make it bigger, we can make it smaller, we can focus it, we can defocus it, we can have a soft edge, we can have a sharp edge, but that's kind of that ultimate control, right? Having, you know, 7 to 9 lenses that sit inside over the top of the LED chip, and then having kind of paddles and sliders that we can slide in and actually make that look like this. You can see my head in the shadow there. So that's ultimate control, right? So we've kind of talked about, you know, super basic wide beam stuff, which is, you know, your opal diffusers or just an incandescent lamp or, you know, all those kinds of bits and pieces that just throw light everywhere. right? Then we've gone to that next level of control where we're using a reflector to try and guide intensity. Yes, it doesn't work all the time, but we're trying to guide that intensity around. Then we go to a lens where we can have, like we saw with the 5 degrees or the linear spreaders, we can use a primary and a secondary optic to actually kind of bring everything in and get it really, really close or there or thereabouts to what we're really kind of picturing in our heads, right, of what we want to achieve and how we want people to enjoy the space. And then finally, taking those lenses and then putting mechanical control items overlay over the top, which can really, really shape it up and get it, to a point where you literally can't see any light outside of the thing that you're trying to illuminate. So awesome. We're going to head out here and then we're going to do a little bit of question time, as we always do. So we're going to jump out this way. Hopefully it doesn't go too dark over here. And we're going to come out here into some natural light, which is always the best, to answer a few questions. So, have we got any questions? Yes, I can see them on the laptop here. So the first one is, this is a funny one because I've kind of not bagged out reflectors, but I haven't been too kind to them. So when would I actually use a reflector is the question. So like I kind of mentioned, when you're just looking for that kind of general kind of ambient illuminance, right? If we're thinking about those 3 kind of layers of lighting, you have your kind of general kind of ambient stuff, your task and your accent. So they are really good, right? You're not going to go into a Kmart or a Big W or something like a big box retailer, and it's not going to be, real high contrast, featured kind of bits and pieces lit up. It's just going to be illuminated, right? So that's when we use reflectors, when it's just that general illumination feel. And we can always accent over the top. We can always task over the top of that general kind of light. So that's when I would use a reflector. How do I ensure alternative light fittings will give me the outcome I want? Okay, so I'm assuming you're talking about, you've maybe specified a lens, and then maybe someone's coming through and you're not sure if it's a lens or a reflector. With the alternative, I know alternatives are a massive issue. I would make sure you're getting samples of the fitting, right? that is probably the ultimate key, is make sure you're actually getting a sample. Make sure you know what a reflector looks like. Make sure you know what a lens looks like. And if you've picked beam angles and all those kinds of things, and you've been very deliberate about how that light's going to interact with the space, you really need to make sure that you're continuing that, not just your brightness, not just your color temperature, all those kinds of things. You need to make sure that the control of the light matches your thoughts about the space. Cool. Third question, I'm just going to read this one. So can the shaper light, so yeah, that is a museum kind of artwork shaper, come in different sizes? Yeah, so what you can do, when I was talking about those mechanical sliders, right, you can actually kind of really open them up, and then you end up with a circular beam, right? And then we can shape it from that circular beam. So you can zoom it out slightly, get a bigger circle, really go right in, and then you can kind of focus it once you've used your sliders as well. So yes, you can get that beam. It's not just that fixed square that you have to kind of like point at things. You can actually, I suppose you can actually choose, right? You can choose by how far away you put it from the wall or how close you put it to the wall. You can increase the beam, you can decrease the beam. Plus you've got a little bit of tools on there as well to do those kinds of things also. I've got another one here. So can I accent with a reflector? Yeah, it depends on the outcome, right? If you want to create a hierarchy between maybe the background and the object, then I think you can, right? So I know I've just said you can't for the last 20 minutes, but say if you had a statue or something like that, right? And it was quite a dark space and you really wanted to make that statue kind of jump out from the wall, right? More than just jump out from a dark space. What you could do is you could have that narrow beam intensity on the actual object itself, and then the background would actually be dimmer. So it can be used, right? It's all about what you've got in your head of the outcome that you want, and then trying to kind of think about, okay, do I want this backlit plus it to stand out? Do I want hierarchy of light in front and behind? Do I want it just to stand out from a black wall? You know, all those kinds of things are the questions you need to ask. So yes, I think in a certain situations you can definitely accent with a reflector. Cool. Well, that's it. There was only 4 today, which is still great. Thank you so much for watching this episode about kind of optics and guiding the light. Yeah, please, if you didn't catch or you jumped for halfway through, jump onto the YouTube at Unios Light, and you can grab all the episodes there, plus the start of this one. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll see you next month.